Welcome to XYPN Radio, where your host Alan Moore brings you into a community of fee-only financial planners who want to profitably and successfully serve Gen X and Gen Y clients. If you're ready to get the knowledge you need from leaders in your field, learn from forward-thinking advisors, and take action on your own goals, XYPN Radio is the show for you. Here's your host.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of XYPN Radio. I am your host, Alan Moore, and thank you so much for joining me today. I am really excited for today's episode because we have Michael Kitces back on, and he and I are co-hosting this episode as we dig into a topic that you've heard us mention many times in previous episodes, and that is about providing financial planning on a monthly subscription or a monthly retainer basis. When we launched XYPN Network, we decided to make it a requirement for advisors to offer financial planning for a monthly subscription fee in order to join XYPN. And since then, we've gotten a lot of questions about the model. So we wanted to give an overview of why we believe it's going to be a core fee structure going forward for how financial planners get paid to do financial planning. Now, in this episode, we did dig into why advisors are charging monthly subscription fees, why they should, how to design a service model around monthly fees, how to use your fee structure to differentiate your practice, and more. So if you've been looking or wanting an overview of monthly subscription fees and how it works in financial planning, then this episode is going to be for you. Now, as always, remember that you can join our VIP community if you ever want to ask additional questions from Michael, myself, guests that we've had on the show, XYPN members, or other listeners at xyplanningNetwork.com/VIP. Now, this month's episodes are brought to you by TD Ameritrade Institutional, which provides comprehensive brokerage and custody services to more than 4,000 fee-based independent registered financial advisors. Without further ado, here is the episode with Michael Kitces and I. Hey, Michael, how you doing today, man?
I'm doing well, Alan. How are you?
I am good. I think we have finally figured out the proper way to bring you into these shows, because the last time I did this, I was like, welcome back to the show, which is awkward because you're on the show like half the time. So
thanks for having me back as a co-host and your partner. Thanks.
Isn't it fun? They say you have to have a lead voice, but I don't know. I mean, I guess I do the interview.
Well, you are the lead voice. You are a better interviewer than I am.
I am the guy that has to do all the scheduling. So today, we were kind of going back and forth on topic, and the one that we kind of settled on it, and I'm really excited to talk through this, is monthly retainers. And I mean, honestly, we could talk for days and days and days about the topic of monthly retainers. But you and I think we both just get so many emails and so many comments and so many questions at conferences around what the heck are y'all talking about when you say monthly retainer. So I'm excited to just kind of do an overview and just kind of chat through, I guess, the two sides of this both sides of this from the two of us, because I think there's some areas where we definitely agree, and I think there's actually going to be some areas where we get to argue, which is always fun. So
yes, we will. I'm sure we will find a few areas to politely fight. I was going to say fight, politely disagree, strenuously disagree.
Politely notch 1 in the Allen column and a 0 in the Kitces column, because I think right now it is a 1 to 0.
Or the other way around.
You want to try to even up the score. So
yes, I would like to even up the score.
So I guess to get started with monthly retainers, I mean, one thing I want to note is we didn't invent monthly retainers. These have actually been around a really long time, possibly started by ACP, used to be ACA with kind of this is Alliance of, used to be Alliance of Cambridge Advisors turned Alliance of Comprehensive Planners, founded by Burt Whitehead. I think they kind of started the annual retainer concept, and some of their members were billing monthly. So we've probably been doing this, 20 years? And no one just ever called it monthly retainers. Yeah,
at least a handful of advisors out there. But, certainly as we're looking at just shifting trends in the landscape, and obviously we're going to talk a lot more about this, we're seeing this rise as kind of an emerging model with a whole other level of interest and popularity to it, perhaps slightly because we also decided to found a network to champion this model as a viable business model for the future for advisors. So we may have kind of amplified that discussion a little bit.
Yeah, and for folks that don't know, we do require that all members of the XYPN Network utilize a monthly subscription service to provide financial planning to Gen X and Gen Y clients, which, it doesn't have to be the exclusive service offering, but we do believe that it needs to be a service offering. And I think this episode will give you an idea of why. Really, when we talk monthly retainers, I think this whole concept comes back to the fact that we built an industry to serve people with money. That's really where we came from, right? We said, who's our ideal client? And the ideal client was older, wealthier individuals. And so we said, how can they pay us? What's the way that makes sense? And we charged them AUM. I mean, because that was the way that made sense.
Well, frankly, I think really it goes even further back than that. So, I mean, when you look at the roots of AUM, it's kind of emerged from two different places at once. One is essentially the levelized commission version of an upfront commission. So a C share versus an A share. And, A share funds and just commission products got sold to people that had assets because you can't buy the product if you don't have the assets to stroke the check into the product. So mutual funds got sold to people with piles of money. And then as mutual fund upfront commissions converted into C shares and ongoing trails, and we built out that model, we saw more people pursuing AUM as a model. The second piece for it is, when you really go back in the US to the origins of AUM model in any form, you're basically going back to trust companies close to 400 years ago. And yeah, that's kind of the origin of the country. And that's the point. Like some of the largest concentration of trust companies these days is actually up in Boston. And the reason that they're all there is early on, Boston was the merchant city in the US as it was forming. Merchants would come here forming all this wealth by transporting goods back and forth from Europe to the US. And then if you had all this wealth in the US and you were going to go out on a ship from which you may or may not ever return, and if you will, it's going to be months or years, you got to really, 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 really trust someone with your money while you're gone. And that was basically the origin of trust companies and the trust model. And that got priced in some versions of, your billing was related to how much money the trust company was overseeing. So it goes back hundreds of years. They didn't quite do billing the same way then. But the roots of AUM for people with money go way, way back. And frankly, to me, if anything, just the growth of AUM has basically been, as we get more and more efficient about doing this, the minimums come lower and lower and lower, and we do AUM for a wider range of people. Like even as much as we say AUM is kind of a wealthy people-centric thing, it used to be a super duper duper wealthy, ultra high net worth thing. Like we've actually brought it down to much of the masses as the industry gets more efficient, but it's still built all this around this idea of the way the service I have to provide for you is to tend over your pool of assets, which kind of necessitates you have a pool of assets to have someone tend.
And I think that has to do with the fact that we've come from an investment-centric model. I mean, that's really what we cared about for a long time. And then we've kind of added in financial planning as we've seen the value and realized just how much it benefits clients. But I do agree with you that it's coming from our origins of, kind of this investment-centric focus that we've always had.
Yeah, well, it's just, if you're trying to figure out how to get paid, it's really easy to figure out how to get paid when you attach it to a larger pile of dollars, which you're responsible for and getting paid to manage. Like it's just, it provides a natural context. I'm getting paid blank, but it's not that much compared to the giant pile of money of yours that I'm managing. And it works. It works very well.
Yeah, it's a nice anchor when you could say, oh, you have $1 million. So $10,000, 1%, no big deal. Like that,
right. Like who wouldn't want to pay 1% to protect the other 99, right?
Right. So, advisors ask all the time, I feel like, it's like, why would you go with this model? And it's so confusing, in terms of the monthly subscriptions. And I think, and yet we know that you can't build a business working with clients without assets on an AUM basis. I mean, we know the math. If you have a bunch of clients without any assets and you charge an AUM fee and that's all you ever charge, you will go out of business more than likely well before you're ever able to grow those assets enough that you're, able to eat, much less actually run a successful business. And yet I think we're so stuck on the AUM model because that's where we've come from that we're still trying to force this AUM retirement-centric, investment-centric model on our younger clients. And that's really where the monthly retainers come from is a lot of folks took a step back and they said, hey, what we've done has been working for the ideal client that we had, which was the older client that had money. But if we were building this from the ground up, regardless of anything else that we've ever done in the past, how would we build a business to serve younger clients or even just in general serve clients that don't necessarily have assets? How would we do financial planning? And truth be told, we would probably, if we didn't have the history that we have, we probably would never even think about charging on an assets basis to do financial planning. We would be thinking, what's the value of planning and how much should I get paid for that? I think that's the hard transition for existing firms to make because, again, we're so anchored in the way we've been doing it. And yet, if we were to build it from the ground up, it would look nothing like the firms of today.
Yeah, I think that's true. And, as we'll touch on probably a little later in the discussion, like I actually still think we don't give enough credit for how robust the AUM model is going to be and how long it's going to last. But it just naturally limits to the people who have pools of money. And I think you're absolutely right that so many of us are just so accustomed to getting paid on pools of money, explaining our value proposition relative to the money, charging our fees relative to the money, and doing all of that in that frame, that the thought of how do I do it differently is just kind of this new scary thing. And you used a word earlier that I was almost giggling about because I've heard the same thing, which is like, well, I don't know how I would do a monthly retainer that seems so much more complex about how you build a business model. Like, what's complex? You you bill them $100 every month, and every month it's the same $100 and you bill them. Like, it's ridiculously simple. You don't even need to have formulas to calculate billing schedules with graduated rates off of a bunch of things. You send them an invoice every month. It's $100. You cannot get simpler than this.
It really is a simple model, which we'll definitely get into. But, one point I think that I want to make is if all you want to do is serve wealthier people, just keep charging AUM. That's fine. Neither of us are going to try to argue that AUM is going to disappear or anything like that. I think it'll disappear faster, I think, than you might argue. But we're not arguing that it's a bad business model to work with wealthier people. But, just off the top of your head, what percentage of Americans do you think have at least $500,000 in an account that can be managed by an advisor? I mean, liquid, so no 401k, we're not talking deferred comp. I mean, literally saying an IRA or a brokerage account to be managed. I mean, take a stab at what percentage of Americans you think we're talking about.
It's pretty limited. So I actually tried to look at this with some of the industry stats that are out there from Spectrum Group. And so, they peg about 30 million households out there with at least 100 grand. So I'm dropping your number even way down further. 30 million with 100 grand. But there are roughly 115 million, almost 120 million households in the U.S. by census bureaus. So maybe 30% of households have at least 100 grand liquid net worth. Now, of those, plucking a number out of thin air, maybe half have that money tied up in some kind of 401k plan or some other location where just the assets are not available for us to manage. So basically, everybody in the U.S., every advisor in the U.S. is fighting for the same 15% of households that have net worth available, liquid, not tied up in a plan.
And I would say 15% is grossly overstated.
And that's 15% in total, right? So not all of them want to hire advisors. A bunch of them are do-it-yourselfers, right? They're never going to hire an advisor. So maybe there's only 5, 7, 10 million households in total. And now, you just start doing the math, and you can quickly see why so many advisors are struggling out there. So there's 5 million households. There's roughly 300,000 financial advisors, according to Cerulli data, a little less. So you just 5 million households, 300,000 advisors. There's only 15 to 20 mass affluent clients for every advisor in the country right now. And, some of them have big practices, which means less for everyone else. So it's not going to work. There are too many advisors focused in the same 30, but only 15 available and only 5 to 7% who are going to use advisors. We're all going after the same subset, and we're just going to run out of room. If you move up the line, so if you go to millionaire households, the estimate, there's not even 9 million households. You carve out the 401ks and the employer plans, you carve out the do-it-yourselfers and the rest. Now maybe you're at 3 or 4 million millionaire households. That might even be generous. 300,000 advisors. So there's not even 10 millionaire clients for each of us. And you take a couple of high net worth firms that have a bunch of them. And most of us are only ever going to scrap out 1 or 2 clients with $1 million. And when I actually look at the broad base of advisors, that's actually what I see. The industry, we tend to talk about a bunch of this, this small subset of very visible RIAs that have higher net worth clients. But the overwhelming majority of advisors are not going to have those because there just aren't any clients left. Like the average advisor I find is like 2 millionaires. And then a couple of big RIAs have, 100 millionaires or 1,000 millionaires. So just most of us are in this environment now where there aren't enough high net worth clients per advisor, or at least ones with liquid assets available. So we obsess over getting a rollover whenever it's coming out, because it's like, ooh, I can get one of the others people coming into the world, coming into our 15% we can touch, and I just got to get them at the transition point. But we're still like, we're all fighting over this tiny segment. It's like, oh yeah, wouldn't it be easier if you just competed for the other 85% of the public that no one else is competing for? And to me, that's the fundamental opportunity around this whole monthly retainer model. Like, it's not about rolling this out as a service to a bunch of people with high AUM so you can undercut AUM advisors to say like, hey, I charge this monthly retainer fee and that guy charges you 1% of that business model. There are virtues to the AUM model and how it grows. I don't know if I would necessarily declare a war on AUM models with a monthly retainer model. But what's the point? Like, if you've got this model that can suddenly serve the other 85%, why you would take it and immediately go into the most competitive space of the 15% where everybody else is and be like, ooh, I can just do it cheaper than everybody else, is just a terrible way to build a business. Like, go after the giant 85% that no one is serving, and like, it's a massive blue ocean. Bad news, if all you do is get like 10,000 clients, there's still enough for every advisor that's doing this if they get 10,000 clients each, and no one can handle a fraction of that. So like, just go where the competition isn't, and that's the opportunity.
You mentioned Blue Ocean. So there's this great book called Blue Ocean Strategy, and it basically breaks, markets down into two oceans. You got red ocean. There's a ton of competition. They say there's sharks, basically tearing each other up, and there's blood in the water. And you get to a point when, there's enough supply and demand, and that supply and demand curve are meeting. It becomes the only thing you have to compete on is price. And that's where, the AUM starts to get a little interesting, and we'll see where the compression of fees come and that sort of thing. But ultimately, we're asking this question of, okay, how do we serve the other 85%? And before we jump into, exactly how we propose you do that, I think it's important to note, and this is just coming from a place of passion that I have personally around wanting to see this become a profession. We talk about the profession of financial planning, and truth be told, that's where we hope it ends up, but we're not a profession. And I can tell you that because we are the only industry that I can think of that only serves people that are wealthy. Can you imagine a world in which doctors would only work with you if your BMI was under, let's say, 20? Oh, over 20? We're sorry. We really don't have a model for you. So we, go to the gym, maybe eat better. And then when your BMI is under 20, then come in and we'll help you stay healthy. Like, imagine a world in which that was the attitude. And yet that's really where, as financial planners, we are. And the question is, how do we serve those that aren't healthy yet, that aren't wealthy? And not just, and I want to be very clear, not just as DFA calls them, and I'll pick on DFA because I hate this term, not just the Henrys, the high earner, not yet rich, high earning, not yet rich, the Henrys, because it's as if we're only going to serve people that will be wealthy one day, maybe because they have high income, or maybe hopefully mommy and daddy die and leave them a lot of money, and we'll serve them.
Like the only reason to serve a young person is as a loss leader to be an old rich person later.
Yeah, neither of us agree with this model. This thought of like, let's only serve rich people or poor people that we think will be rich one day. How do we take a step back and just say, how do we just do great financial planning for people, regardless of assets or where we think their assets are going to go, and run a profitable business today? Run a profitable business that's going to serve clients in such a real and meaningful and impactful way. And yeah, maybe you groom a lot of clients to be $1 million clients. I don't know. But that's ultimately not the goal. The goal is to help people live their great lives, because that's what financial planning is all about.
Yeah, well, and I mean, recognizing like there's nothing wrong with the fact that the model will probably evolve in grow in ways over time. And when you look at almost any longstanding established advisory firm that's been around for 20 years and does AUM, virtually all of them were founded by people who didn't start with AUM. They started out selling products to people, investment or insurance products, depending on which side of the industry they came from in the 70s, 80s, early 90s. That was actually how they made their money and got their initial clients. And then later, they took this existing base of clients who were accumulating wealth and said, geez, maybe I could serve you on an AUM basis. And they grew up with their clients, which is which is fine. And that's a fine path. And it just makes the point, like the fact that when you start your business in your 20s and 30s and you're doing one model doesn't mean that has to be the only thing you ever do for your clients over the next 30 years. Your model can and should evolve to serve your clients. It's just the landscape changes, right? Like 20, 30 years ago, there were no ETFs, there were no index funds. We did portfolio management differently. Term insurance was more expensive. Like just lots of things were different. And so we sold different products and we did different things than we do now. So it's, if you're still running your model from 1985, like this is not the good version of Back to the Future. Our models evolve, but still, you don't have to like build a model that says I'm going to lose money today, just hoping that someday these people turn out to be great AUM clients in the future. Serve them well now. And if their needs evolve over time, serve them with an evolving business over time, but serve them and get paid for it and build something that's meant to be viable from the start.
So, we're both in agreement that we believe in the value of financial planning, and we believe in the value of providing financial planning to your clients. And if you're already doing comprehensive financial planning, or you're getting into the business and you want to do comprehensive financial planning, we are not trying to, today we're not going to argue about service model in terms of, are you doing, all the different pieces, retirement planning, tax projections, college planning, insurance planning, estate planning, all of the different pieces that go into comprehensive financial planning. What we're saying is, you can provide that same service and you're going to bill it in a different way. Now, there are some tweaks and there's some questions that we'll bring up that we hear just from advisors around exactly the mechanics of how this work. But we're not proposing that the financial planning just somehow magically changes. We're just saying bill your clients differently. And anytime we use...
And then build a service model relevant for that billing structure and the kind of people you're going to serve. And
that target market. Absolutely. So, yeah, when it comes to monthly retainers, anytime I speak occasionally about monthly retainers and working with younger clients, advisors always look at me just totally flabbergasted. And it's so funny because they'll say things like, what kind of financial planning do you do for young clients? And you can go back and listen to previous episodes of the two of us talking about that. Yeah. But it's like, it's baffling to them. And yet when I look at it and I tell a young person, okay, look, you're actually going to pay me monthly. And we'll talk about different ways to calculate a fee, but you're going to pay me $150 a month. And for that, you get access to a comprehensive financial planner. They just go, okay. And the reason is because every bill they pay is monthly. You want to have a fun time? Try to explain AUM to a 25-year-old. That's fun. We're going to charge you 1.2%, and it's going to go down over time as you get more assets, but it's actually not 1.2%. We're going to bill you on a quarterly basis in arrears at the end of the month based on an average daily balance throughout that month at that quarterly fee, and it comes out at the end of the month. Have that conversation and tell me about the look you get. They're going to think you're scamming them.
You're like, I bill your credit card $100 every month. How's that? Oh, okay.
It's just so funny that, like, as an advisor, we think, oh, AUM, it's so simple. And yet from the client perspective, monthly fees just make sense. Everything is monthly. Every bill is monthly now. We don't pay anything annually or quarterly.
Yep. So let's talk a little bit about, all right, so I said, hey, I'll give you financial planning for $100 a month. And someone says, great. So what the heck do I actually do for them now? Which I guess is not so much what do I do for $100 a month per se, but it kind of this intersection of what do I do for a person in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, so Gen X, Gen Y person, for $100 a month.
Yeah, and I think that $100 a month, people get really stuck on that number. So I want to address that first. And that is, people say, well, how much should I charge? 100, 200? How should I bill it? And I always answer that with a question, and that's, who's your ideal client?
What are you going to do what do they need, and what are you going to do for them?
Because if you're working with, new parents and it's fairly simple, fairly standardized, then maybe the pricing may need to be a little lower. The financial position that they're in, they may not be ready to spend $300 a month on financial advisor. But if you tell me that you're going to serve young doctors that are graduating residency and becoming full MDs and becoming doctors and going out and getting, $500,000 salaries, well, then you can charge a lot more because the service model is going to be different. So,
and you're going to do more things for them in different things that are going to have higher financial impact. I mean, just the most basic level, like, what do you charge? Well, it depends on the people, their ability to pay, like their means to pay, And since they're going to be paying, monthly out of cash flow, what their incoming cash flow is realistically going to matter. And just what are you doing for them? So, I mean, at the bookend extremes, if you're working with some group like teachers, maybe you can only do $100 a month because their cash flow is just limited. And then I know, an advisor out there that works with entrepreneurs, and his starting retainer is $10,000 a year. And completely different service models. You get completely different things if you're going to do ongoing financial coaching for a teacher at $100 a month versus working with entrepreneurs at $10,000 a year. And their income scales are different. So, just their means and capacity to pay looks different. So who are you going to serve and what actually matters to them?
So that's why it's so hard to sit down and go, okay, well, what's the service model on this monthly retainer? Because ultimately we're talking about monthly retainers. It's just a way of billing your client. The service that you provide really comes down to who's your ideal client. Who are you going to serve, and what services do they need from you? You may work with a subset of clients that need, concierge services, or they need bill pay, or they need you to, book their hotel rooms. There are advisors that do that kind of thing, or you may be working with clients that don't require so much time. And so you're billing a little less. So let's start there. And again, kind of back to what we said originally, I'm an advocate for you do comprehensive financial planning. I mean, you do whatever you need to do in order to help those clients live their great life. And the core is generally going to be the same. We're still going to be doing investment planning and insurance and estate and college planning and tax planning and retirement and all those basics. And then we start getting into kind of what are those niche services that your ideal clients need. It could be bill pay. It could be career coaching. It could be, having a really high level of student loan knowledge. So you can do, really in-depth student loan analysis. It really could be a very, very wide range of things. It could be travel hacking. Could be helping your clients.
Yeah, how do you maximize credit card benefits? Because if I can do those reward points and optimize them and have someone show me how to do that, you can knock out most of your annual fee and just showing them how to do the world travel they want, and they'll save more than $1,000 on travel, and that pretty much takes care of your fee.
So in terms of the way that this is structured, I'm a big advocate for a 3-part fee, and we'll talk a little bit about investment management in a minute. So we're focused on how do we bill for comprehensive financial planning. I'm really an advocate for you charge an upfront fee for plan development, and then you charge an ongoing fee for financial planning. And I've seen a lot of iterations of this. It's one of the very unique advantages of working with so many firms inside of XYPN Network is that a lot of folks have tried a lot of different things. And I myself went through a couple iterations of different fee structures. And I'm a big fan. Well, let me take a step back. People will ask, do I need to develop the comprehensive financial plan up front? And I have seen some advisors try to do modular planning where they say, okay, we're just going to start and we're going to talk cash flow. And then in 3 months, we'll talk insurance. And in 3 more months, we'll talk estate. And I've never actually seen that model work because ultimately, as comprehensive financial planners, we all know it is extremely difficult to have conversations about one of those pieces without bleeding into all the others. And pretty much for the most part, everyone that I have seen start modular has ended up back in this place of, okay, we need to develop and do a full analysis, develop the full plan up front, and then start kind of going into implementation and maintenance.
I have to admit, I'm a little bit skeptical as to whether this model is really dead or this kind of modular build to whole, or if the reality is just we're still so accustomed and addicted to doing everything comprehensively that we don't know how to limit the scope. Right? And I think of this in terms of the doctor. If I break my arm, they're going to do a certain set of tests and evaluations to check me out. But if he's so comprehensive, he does a colonoscopy, he's just a crappy doctor because I broke my arm. There's a difference between gathering enough information around the scope to, look at whatever the thing is, whatever the problem area is, and respond to it, and saying the only way I can answer the most finite possible question is to do an infinitely complex comprehensive financial plan. Frankly, my gut, we're actually addicted to doing this as advisors because we're so obsessed with the scarcity of clients that we're every problem my client has to be super duper complex because that's how I sell them a $2,000 upfront financial plan. That imagine for a moment, here's your problem. 1,000 clients are lined up at your door and they are ready to hand you money to pay you to answer their questions. And you need to figure out the maximally efficient way to answer their questions while you take their money. I doubt all of us are going to come back to the point of saying every single one of them can't get any advice until they do a comprehensive financial plan. I don't buy it. I think we convince ourselves that everything has to be super comprehensive because we're selling complexity in order to sell our services. And I get it, until we get better about marketing ourselves and get a higher flow of clients, that may be where we find ourselves as kind of the trap. But just, I have to admit, I'm a little bit skeptical about whether this whole like modular to whole approach is really broken, or if it's just because we're so desperate to get upfront revenue when we're starting practices that we have to convince every client that they need to pay an upfront because we need the revenue.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that this comes back to a lot of firms, and I'm a big advocate for this, and you've written about this in the past. I'm a big fan of having the ongoing service model, but also some sort of one-time project-based service model. And that's really the modular planning that you're talking about. And that's a client comes in and you just do a student loan analysis. And yes, you can look and you can see all these other issues, and maybe you point them out and say like, hey, if we were working on, on an ongoing basis, there's these other things that we would be doing, kind of all these other topics. But today we're just focused on student loan analysis. And for that, you charge $400 or $500 or whatever fee. And then we have that ongoing service model that's kind of where we're doing that comprehensive plan development and analysis. But there's another issue that we're really, I think that comes up in addition to just the services that you're providing in that initial plan development. That's actually the psychology behind the way that we perceive value in price. And even for advisors that do maybe a little bit of modular planning, or they do the comprehensive planning, but they just bill monthly, I have found anecdotally, and we don't have any data on this just because we haven't had enough time to collect enough data to be able to show best practices, but just anecdotally, we have seen that it takes clients a lot longer to get information back to the advisor, to schedule meetings, things like that, when they're just paying $100 a month. But when you ask them to write a check for $1,000, $1,500, $2,000, whatever that number is, and they stroke that check, now all of a sudden they're really engaged, and they don't write that check until they're ready to start the plan.
Well, and I think that's a little bit of the distinction. There's been this whole discussion, I think, for years of like, oh, if you don't bill clients a whole bunch of money up front, they don't take the planning seriously. And I'm still really not convinced that's valid, but I do think it's true that there are people who just aren't taking planning seriously in the first place, and it's easy for them to continue to not take the planning seriously when they don't actually have to make a commitment like writing a check. So like it's not that writing a check makes them suddenly more committed necessarily, but having a check up front screens out people who aren't actually ready to do it because they're not ready to pay a check when they're not ready to do it. Now, the flip side to it is there are also people who might be ready, but they don't actually understand what financial planning is all about because they've never gotten it and they've never been through it before. And if your upfront fee is too high, you will take people who would have been fantastic lifelong clients and you'll scare them off because they didn't want to write the check in the first month or two for a service they've never had, never experienced, don't understand what its value is, and have to experience it a little in order to really get it. So just there is a balancing point there. Now, frankly, in today's environment, because a lot of these, the other 85% is so grossly underserved, realistically, you could probably get away with a decent upfront fee and still have enough clients left to work with. At some point down the road, when this is popular and much more widely adopted, maybe that looks a little bit different because you've got multiple advisors who are all doing good works for the same clients, and you charge an upfront and they don't, and suddenly clients are like, well, why should I pay an upfront when this other person will do it for me for no upfront? But that's a competitive force that probably takes a while to play out.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a very long time before you have to have that discussion. But if you go back and listen to our last bonus episode, our last mailbag question, we did talk about this a little bit in terms of having a niche market. And again, I know everyone's sick of hearing the two of us say it, and we're going to say it in every episode because
it's not going to end.
We just believe in it.
If you're out there and you're tired of it, like, I'm sorry, it's really not going to end.
Maybe just listen to the interviews where the two of us aren't getting together. But, you made a really good point in that episode where you said, if you can, and we'll talk a little bit about service calendar, but if you can really showcase your expertise through a service calendar, through a service model, through your fee structure, all of that sort of thing, and show a client exactly what you're going to do and when you're going to do it, it makes it a lot easier to charge those upfront fees and those higher monthly fees because you're showing them that you're an expert in them and not just some general financial planner. So this comes back to, I guess, two more points. One, and I think this is often very overlooked, is that you can actually use your monthly fee or just your fee in general to differentiate yourself as an advisor and focus on an ideal client profile. So for instance, let's say you're an advisor that really wants to work with service members. You could be the advisor that charges $100 to $200 a month based on complexity, or you could create a fee structure that as an O1, you're going to pay $80 a month. And whenever you get promoted to O2, you go to $120 a month. Why? Because you know, as an expert in working with service members, that their pay doubles when they go from O1 to O2. You actually know what I'm talking about when I say O1 and O2. And that's basically just going from a second lieutenant to a first lieutenant as an officer. You know that. And so think about the power of having a fee structure using this monthly model that basically shows a potential client that you work exclusively with them because it's so well honed.
Right. Like we don't charge a fee based on income. We just have a baseline fee for residents and another one for practicing physicians in their first 5 years. And then another one when you take over as a owner of a medical practice, because you know what those income levels look like and what those dynamics look like. And you can price according to services based on what's relevant to them, not once you make more than $100,000 a year, I'm going to charge you another $100 a month.
Exactly. And so there's just so many opportunities to be creative. And I want to invite listeners to be creative and to think about this, that, we're talking about billing on a monthly basis because I think psychologically and just culturally, that's where our economy is at. And it just makes sense to charge a monthly fee because that's really where every other industry has gone. But you can be creative with it. And again, if you're not that service member or you're not that doctor and you hit the website with these fee structures, guess what? You're going to go away. And if you've listened to any episodes with Michael and I, we think that's a good thing. That if someone hits your website and they look at your fee structure and think, oh no, I'm not a doctor, this doesn't make any sense to me. Good. That means you're going to attract doctors and you're going to repel everyone else. The final piece is the integration of assets under management. So this is a question that I get all the time is, okay, so I get it, Alan, I'm going to charge $1,000 up front. I'm going to charge $200 a month because that's what my ideal client wants to pay me. What about investments? So are you a fan of adding investment management on an AUM fee on top of this, or do you think it should be included somehow in the service model?
I think there's room to blend because they're different services. Now, realistically, I doubt you're going to charge the typical 1% AUM fee plus your monthly retainer, when the reality is so many advisors that charge 1% AUM fees are charging 1% because that is the bundled fee for, ongoing planning services and such tucked in. So you may segment them out a little bit when you get into what is pure investment management, guidance, support, design, availability for, managing through behavior gap and all that left. What is that markup? I think the market's still finding a number, more than 25 bips, less than 100 bips. I think it's going to land somewhere in that space. I know we see a lot of members of XYPN Network are setting this in like the 0.5 to 0.7 sort of range. There's a bunch that are coming in there, but I think there's room for having them separate, for having them be separate, because functionally, particularly if you're structuring your business this way in the first place, your financial planning service is separate than your investment management service. If you are financial planning centric, it has to start there because many of these people aren't going to have assets and aren't going to need any support in asset management, but some of them will, or they're going to create assets over time. They're going to ask you questions. They're going to want ongoing support. They're going to want you to monitor it and rebalance it and do tax loss harvesting and the other pieces that go with it. And granted, some of them can just open up a brokerage account and do that themselves, but some of them would rather have you do it for them. They're delegating to you, and they're going to pay you some reasonable number for your asset management service while they pay you some other number for your financial planning service. So I think it's reasonable to do both, but you're probably not just going to charge your planning fees on top of like a full-on AUM fee. Then at some point it starts looking like a potential double dipping sort of thing.
Yeah, I definitely agree that we're seeing kind of this split of we're going to charge for financial planning, and if you want us to manage investments, we will charge an AUM fee for investment management. My only pushback is I actually see a lot of firms starting at 1% and then they drop a little faster. And the reason is because they can run with no asset minimums. So for clients that are out there with a $5,000 Roth IRA, if you're charging them,
people are going to charge like 2, you're charging 1 that actually is a discount.
Exactly. And it's because you're profitable serving them on that monthly basis, doing that financial planning. And then, the marginal cost of adding, investment management, whether it's a $5,000, a $50,000 or $500,000 account, is covered by that 1%.
Sure.
And so I do agree that we see it kind of tear off a little faster, and some will start at 95 bips or something like that. But we certainly don't see, or I don't see, I don't know what the right word is, that, it's not like a 1.5% AUM fee plus a monthly fee. I do think that.
Well, and I mean, bearing in mind putting that in context, right? Like if you're charging a 1% AUM fee on a $5,000 IRA, like let's keep it in context, your availability of advice, you're charging them $4 a month.
Right.
That's all we're actually talking about here.
Now, I'm going to get an email from an advisor about this, so I'm just going to answer the question now. And I get it every time I present, and I say, we're going to have a client, they're going to pay, $1,000 up front, $150 a month, and they're going to have a $50,000 IRA at 1% AUM. So we're going to charge them a monthly fee plus AUM. Somebody will always email me and go, oh my gosh, you're charging them 4.4% AUM. How could you do that? How are you are robbing your clients blind? And I think that's a hilarious question and comment.
It's just like we're so obsessed with AUM fees and we're so obsessed with framing everything to an AUM fee, then we have to put it in that context. Like I agree. So let's imagine you offer two services for your clients. You do investment management, and for $100 a month, you give them yoga coaching. And you go, oh my God, you charge them 4% of assets to do yoga? Like that to me is what I hear. Like, yep. It's a yoga class. Why are you relating it to the value of their portfolio? It has nothing to do with their portfolio. And granted, a lot of advisory firms have bundled financial planning into AUM fees. So I get that. But when someone comes along and unbundles and does something separate, to say I have an unrelated service to the portfolio, oh my God, that's a high percentage of the portfolio. Like,
doesn't
who
make
cares?
Any sense.
Like, I mean, have you ever calculated for your clients what percentage of their portfolio they're spending on beer every month? Like, oh my God. What percentage of your portfolio do you spend on the gym? What percentage of your portfolio do you spend on cable? Well, millennials don't have cable TV. Your phone bill, your smartphone connection. Like, I mean, there's all sorts of stuff we pay for on a monthly basis that are services that are valuable for us, that it makes no sense to relate it back to the portfolio. And unbundled financial planning is one of those.
I love it. That's a way better example that I've ever given. And I have literally answered that email 40 times in the last year. It is a very, very common question. So, I would put it out there for folks that this is what we're talking about with restructuring the thinking around financial planning and unbundling. And to your point, we have used free financial planning to gather assets. That's historically where we've been. And we're advocating for stop doing that. Planning is the really valuable service here. So let's charge for it. And we'll split out investment management as a separate service.
Yeah. Well, and I guess at the most basic level, like, no, I'm for their financial planning services, I'm charging them a fraction of 1% of their income. And then for their AUM, I'm charging them a fraction of 1% of their portfolio. And I mean, if you want to relate it to something, relate it that way. Relate their financial planning fee to their income, because you're helping them with their income and their cash flow and their spending and their budgeting and all the directions that their money goes in their household, their cash flow goes in their household. And then there's also an AUM service for the investment assets on their balance sheets. Like if you want to relate it to something, relate it over there. But like, I mean, I could come to an advisor who's retired, like, wait, let me get this straight. Your client has $1 million portfolio. You're charging them $10,000 a year, and their total income last year was only $26,000. So you're charging them a financial planning fee that's 40% of their income. Aren't you screwing your clients?
And there would be outrage at that kind of accusation, and yet that's exactly what we're being accused of.
I mean, that's the thing. Like, it doesn't make any more sense to relate financial planning fees to assets than it does to relate asset fees to people's household income, when of course assets and income can be very dissociated to each other, particularly young people that can have higher income and limited assets, and retirees that can have higher assets and limited income. Like, the service has to be viewed in the context of what it's relevant for, and particularly for someone that does planning fees for planning and AUM fees for AUM. Why you would relate a planning fee back to an AUM fee, I don't understand. Again, like, if you're serving high net worth clients and you want to charge them an AUM fee and bundle financial planning in, like, kudos to you if your minimums and your fee structure works for that and your average client works for that. We do a version of that in our advisory firm where we do asset management and financial planning for retirees. But the fact that we chose to bundle financial planning into an AUM fee doesn't mean everybody in the planet has to view their financial planning services relative to their assets when that's not the primary thing they're buying.
Totally agree. So a couple quick questions that we do get from advisors just to address. One is, compliance. And I know compliance is always the scary, hairy monster. And so there are a couple things that come up, and we'll just address these really fast so we can get to some juicier stuff, because I know compliance is boring. But most of you are probably familiar with the custody rules that say, we can't charge more than $500 more than 6 months in advance, which is one of those areas where we've started pushing this concept of, just charge them monthly, and that's okay. And all the state regulators, we haven't had any issues with state regulators around that, except for a couple states have brought up a point that I find very interesting. And that is the state of Utah comes to mind. There are a couple of others that are escaping me right now that have said they're very anti-retainers in general, particularly monthly, because they want to see exactly what you're going to do every single month for your fee. So if you charge them $100, you need to do something for that $100, which is really not realistic. And that kind of bleeds into the next question of, do you have to do something every single month for your client? What we have found is there are actually some ways to word your language. Instead of saying, you're going to pay $100 a month, that you actually say you're going to pay an annual fee of $1,200 a year. And for that, these are the services that you're going to receive throughout the year. But instead,
I've got an idea. Why don't you bill that monthly?
Isn't that a beautiful thing? And that has actually passed through every regulator that we have tried that with.
So you can't bill people. You can't have a monthly service. You can have an annual service billed monthly.
That's exactly right.
Your regulation at work.
So there are some ways that you can be creative with the compliance that we've not had any issues literally implementing monthly retainers. We have had some fun caveat that have come up.
Well, and I think, frankly, at the broader level, so like two things that go with this. One, I think we're just watching one of those moments where innovation of business models is leapfrogging regulation a little. So, they're figuring out how to adjust sort of this recognition. Like, there's not actually anything wrong with billing people monthly, and there's not wrong with giving people ongoing service, but we're just trying to figure out how to fit this into the parameters of what we got. Frankly, the second piece that goes along with it is that I think will be a little bit more awkward for more years to come is, ultimately, these are questions coming from regulators that were originated to oversee investment management services and investment management advice, while we're ultimately offering a financial planning model of which investment advice may be either a small, very small, or minuscule portion of the service. But technically, the minute I say anything about which fund you should buy in your 401k, I do have to register as an investment advisor in my state to give that advice, even if I never manage assets and touch the portfolio. And I think that's part of the dynamic that you're seeing here as well, that in investment regulators' mind, if you're billing someone's portfolio every month, you should be looking at it every month, which is perhaps a fair statement. Notwithstanding the whole bill them manually or invoice them annually and bill them monthly. But I think that's the challenge that you're just seeing from regulators is this whole idea of they don't know when they're investment regulators, they're struggling with how to oversee financial planning and a financial planning monthly retainer fee because that wasn't really their historical domain.
Now, one more quick question that does come up is, are we literally charging clients credit cards or debit cards or checking accounts for the monthly fee? And the answer is yes. Now, if you're managing investments for a client, you're welcome to hit their brokerage account, but you can use other systems. I'm a big advocate of Pay Simple, which is one that we provide inside of XYPN Network that allows you to do ACH debits for 40 cents a transaction, but you can also use things like PayPal or QuickBooks Online in order to bill credit cards. Now you have to pay 2.9%.
Yeah, well, and I find the biggest challenge on this is just, again, you talk about kind of leapfrogging regulation and disruptive business models. A lot of providers don't want to facilitate ACH and credit cards for financial planners because they don't understand our business model, what they do, and they're always wary of service models where they're afraid you're going to charge people for a month or a year's worth of stuff and then charge a whole bunch of people at once and then vanish and basically commit fraud, right? Like not a problem with the product. You either deliver the product or not. It's always a little more squeamish with services and credit providers because they're afraid of chargebacks for people who don't follow through. So I know I've talked to a lot of advisors that have struggled just getting approved basically as a merchant on some of these platforms. Many of them charge high risk fees because they're concerned. So like in addition to your ACH or credit card debits, you may have a high risk fee on top of that. I know we went through and we made a deal with Pay Simple for XYPN Network. One of the things we did was get them to waive the high risk fee by showing them that, we are a real network of people that do this. But at least be aware, those are the kinds of dynamics you will see if you're reaching out to payment providers They're like, oh, you're a service provider in financial services. We've never talked to one of you before.
Because we've always billed on AUM.
Yes, or sold them products and got paid a commission. So they're kind of figuring us out at the same time. And I don't think that's going to be a permanent blocking point, or it's not a deal maker or anything of that nature. But just be cognizant that there may be some speed bump out there for it.
Yeah, and I will tell you, having talked to probably 24 regulators about ACH and the monthly model and all of that, you will never hear a regulator go, yes, I approve this. You will hear I do not disapprove this. And if you have compliance folks that are anti new things, one of the ways around this is just help your client go in and set up automatic bill pay for them to send you a check from their bank once a month for the amount. And so there are some ways to get around it. If PayPal or QuickBooks Online either won't accept you or your compliance folks just really don't want you using it, you can literally have them mail you a check. Yeah. So we're gonna kind of wrap up with two fundamental questions. One is, how are we actually calculating the fees? And then the second one is, what are we doing for clients for this fee? Which is probably central
that's probably a good question to answer.
So, real quick, there are a couple of ways of calculating fees. If you are really, really, really honed in and you know your ideal client, it's a lot easier to charge flat fees. If you, just like we were talking about earlier, if you only work with service members, it's really easy to say at 01, you're going to pay me this much. At 02, you're going to pay me this much. Or as a resident, you're going to pay me this much. As a, full-fledged doctor, in your first 5 years, you're going to pay me this much. That is one way to do it. What we end up seeing, though, are our advisors are hesitant to take our advice on niche markets, and they tend to take a step back and go, well, I could work with a couple of different types of people. So they end up with a range of $100 to $200 a month has been a sweet spot, unless the niche market is, commands a higher fee. That just based on complexity, maybe a single individual's on the lower end, a married couple with a small business or rental real estate maybe on the upper end, and everyone kind of ends up somewhere in the middle and at $150 a month. That is one way. Another way is if you go back and listen to episode 20, so XYPlanNetwork.com/20, we had Andrew Severston from the Planning Center talking about charging a net worth plus income retainer, essentially, where they calculate it's 0.5% of net worth and 1% of income. You can go back and listen to that episode to get all the details on it. But basically, that's their way of calculating the annual fee, and it's paid monthly. So there are a couple of different ways to do this. And there's more that we're not even talking about, percentage, just straight percentage of income. Advisors can be very creative, and you can be even more creative whenever you know your ideal client profile. So we'll rush through that, and we can answer more questions about that inside our VIP community. And you can join at XYPlanNetwork.com/VIP and post some questions there specifically around fee structures, which we'll probably end up doing an episode just on that topic. But I do want to close out with a discussion around what do we do for clients for a monthly retainer fee or a monthly subscription fee.
What are we going to do for them? So I find there's kind of two challenges with this. Sort of one is, what am I going to do for them? And the other is like, how often do I have to do it? So do I have to actually, like, if I bill them monthly, do I have to do something for them every month is basically what the question comes down to. And so I'll start with the second part first. Like, no, just simply put, you don't have to do something for them necessarily every single month because they're being billed monthly, right? Like, there are plenty of clients out there who, believe it or not, pay me on a quarterly basis for AUM. And it turns out I didn't meet with them about the portfolio every quarter, right? Like, We've already lived this in other models. And frankly, at the other extreme, I think about it in terms of any other kind of professional services, right? Like, I pay my health insurance so that I can get doctor visits on a monthly basis. I pay my health insurance on a monthly basis for access to my doctor. I don't actually see my doctor every month. I pay a monthly bill for the fact that when I need to see my doctor, I expect to be able to schedule an appointment in a timely manner and go in and see my doctor. And I think the first piece of these financial planning monthly retainer models is just to recognize that dynamic, which is really the same for most of us that do wealth management on an AUM basis as well, right? Like we don't always meet with every client quarterly because we bill quarterly. We meet with them as needs arise. We have some proactive outreach for them to check in on a regular basis, but you don't necessarily have to do a meeting with them and have some value moment every single time a bill goes out. And frankly, I know a few of our XYPN members kind of frame this further by saying, like, look, ultimately, I work on an annual basis. Here are the things I'm going to do with you over the next year. I'm going to bill you monthly to make this palatable for cash flow purposes. And so you're going to pay me at $100 a month. But ultimately, I charge $1,200 a year. And here are the things I'm going to do for you over the year. And the things you list are not literally going to be every single month. you can extend that by actually making this thing that I like to call the client service calendar, which is you literally make up like a calendar of here are the things I am going to do for you year to year. So at the beginning of the year, you might say like, all right, we're going to rebalance all the investment accounts and the 401k plans. That's pretty much all we're going to have to do for the next 6 months on the investment side. We're going to do an annual check of your credit score, make sure there's nothing need to fix there. We're going to do like the postmortem on your spending last year and see how that's going. Then, February, not much going on. I'm going to do an educational webinar for all my clients and have them send out a monthly newsletter, but we probably won't meet. March, I'll check in with you about college projections for your kids and make sure that you did your IRA contribution because it's March and we're coming up to the deadline soon. Then April maybe is another webinar. May, I'm going to do a review of your insurance policies because we should do that on an annual basis. That's the thing we do in May. And then you just start parceling it out all the way through the year. Some things might be one-to-many scenarios, like we do webinars for our clients in these months. And of course, the more targeted you are, the more you can make relevant webinars. There might be a monthly newsletter that goes out every month. There might be a couple of things that you automate periodically in the year. And then there might be months that you do check-in calls or a particular service. So hey, in July, we just do a check-in call about how spending's going and making sure you're on budget. But at the end of the year, we do a really in-depth benchmarking review of your salary, how you're getting paid, whether you need to go in there and ask for a better raise or get ready to look for another job because you're getting underpaid where you are. What can we do to move your income? We're going to do an in-depth thing on that every December because that's really important for you. So, that whole nature of what you do, it may be a blend of one-to-one things, one-to-many things, check-ins that are reactive, proactive services that you structure for them. And again, this is just, can't emphasize enough, we're going to keep beating the drum. This is why it matters that you have a niche, that you have a target market, right? Because if you're working with service members, what this calendar looks like is going to be completely different because of the timing of their income, their raises, their benefits decisions, all the other things that are going on in their lives, than if you're working with doctors who have a completely different schedule and calendar around which their business works and operates. And that'll be different than entrepreneurs, and that'll be different than lots of other groups that are out there. So the more targeted you are, the more you can paint a picture of a really focused service calendar that's actually relevant for everyone. And the problem that I find for so many advisors, again, when you don't have a focus to your clientele, you start trying to make this service calendar, you basically throw in everything in the kitchen sink because you're trying to think of everything that could possibly be relevant for any person you're ever going to sit across from. And now you actually commit to a service calendar that would implode your business if you tried to do it because you're doing so much for so many people every month, trying to be everything to everyone.
Yeah, and I think that's the tendency, especially for smaller firms when you're starting out. You have nothing but time and you want to take care of your clients and you feel, I think a lot of folks do feel pressure to do something monthly. So I've seen advisors before that will say, okay, well, I'm going to email all of my clients monthly. And that works until you get about 20 clients. And at about 20 clients is when you go, oh crap, this is not scalable because
they reply and they ask stuff that I probably didn't need to ask every month. It could have gone 2 or 3 months and we could have done this together. But I sent 3 emails month in 3 months instead of 1 email every 3 months and created, more activity pace for something we could have just done all at once in 3 months. And kind of make my problems worse.
And it's really hard to hand that off. That's the other thing I've seen, handing that off to a junior advisor or another advisor, paraplan or whatnot. It's a really challenging task because you end up trying to you're making stuff up essentially in order to try to figure out what to reach out about. So,
yep.
In terms of doing financial planning, really common, and again, it all comes back to your target market, but really common, we see 2 meetings a year with unlimited email support. And I know a lot of advisors are scared of the word unlimited. We just don't see clients abuse unlimited email support, and we do this inside of XYPN Network. I mean, in terms of how we work with our advisors, that we offer unlimited email support for compliance and marketing and business coaching. And we just don't see people take advantage of it. We just don't hear about it.
They take advantage of it by using it. They don't abuse it.
That's fair. Yeah, excuse my Southern language. We do not see them abusing the fact that they have unlimited access. They're not emailing you every single day.
Well, and frankly, at the extreme, if you have a client that is that high burden. So first of all, any service model we have this, right? we run an AUM model for advisory firm practice. I can already think of a couple of clients that we spend way more hours on than anybody else because they just tend to be higher service level. And you know what? When you got a whole bunch of clients and there are a bunch that are a little more intensive and a whole bunch that are a little bit less intensive, it averages out across the business, and that's manageable. People will find their kind of average utilization levels. But that being said, if you have someone that just grossly uses your services way above what your model was built to do and intended, then, after a year or two, you have a conversation with them that says, you know what, Jimmy, Jenny, whoever, I feel like your needs are just a little bit more in depth and beyond what I'm able to provide. So I'd like to recommend you out to another advisor, or we need to move to a different service tier so that I can really respond to the needs that you've got. And you graduate them up or you graduate them out. Like, you're not unequivocally committed to working with every client forever because you took them on once. You are, as the advisor, allowed to say, this client isn't a good match for me. And it's not that you should just have this Machiavellian thing where I'm going to take as many clients as I can. I'm going to fire everyone who actually needs service. I'm just going to try to keep all the people that I never have to do any work for, because that's not a cool thing to do for your clients. But it's okay to recognize every now and then you get someone whose service demands are just way off the spectrum. And it's a problem. But what we find overwhelmingly is it's virtually never a problem. Like, it turns out most people on the planet are not assholes who are trying to abuse you. They're normal, reasonable human beings who are just trying to pay something and get value in return. And frankly, the biggest scenario I see where people get in trouble with this is when they try to do everything for everyone. So they don't articulate what their service model is. They articulate no expectations for clients. And so the client doesn't actually understand that contacting you weekly with a finance question is not a cool thing, because you've got more clients right there. Like, they've never had a financial planner and they've never been in a relationship like this. And you set no expectations because you have no clear service calendar, because you're trying to do everything for everyone. So you're afraid to define your services. This is, again, where you get yourself in trouble. When you say, look, here's what we do. These are when we do our check-in calls. These are when we do our webinars. These are when we do our monthly newsletters. Here's our focus service on your salary review. Here's our focus service on your budgeting. Here's your focus service on your portfolio rebalancing. Here's when we do the insurance and estate review. Like, when all of it's structured and people know when the check-ins are and when the flow is, virtually no one abuses this and takes advantage of it, because it's clear what the dynamics are. And you can always tell them, look, if there's an urgent issue, you can always contact me directly by email and I'll respond. But when you've set up the expectation, but we do have these check-in calls every 3 months, so you shouldn't need to contact me unless it's really, really urgent. That alone screens out like 98% of the problem scenarios that were going to come up. Not all of them, but almost all of them.
Agreed. I've always felt like if you had to fire a client, you probably didn't do a good job of screening them or setting the expectation up front. But it is a problem that can be fixed. And to your point, people get I think advisors focus on the one client that was the problem client and not the other 99 that never abused the service. And, I was always more bothered by the clients I couldn't get to email me back or ask me questions or come in for meetings than I ever was about the ones that showed up a little too often. So,
yep.
So what we wanted today to be was just kind of general education, kind of a general overview of the monthly subscription service model and kind of what we see, which is really that it is a way, we think probably the best way that we can bring financial planning to a new generation of client. And maybe new generation doesn't necessarily mean age. There's nothing saying this only works for Gen Y. This also works for, baby boomers that haven't saved for retirement but need financial planning guidance. And
that's a good point just to put out there. Like, it's not that monthly retainer is exclusive to young people any more than AUM is exclusive to boomers, right? There are a subset of millennials that have a giant pile of money and need help managing it. There's not a ton of them, but they are out there. Like, it's not about exclusivity of the generation. I think it's just about having a business and service model that targets a particular group. But certainly, for what we do at XYPN Network, we are passionate about seeing this model as a means to bring financial planning to the 98% of millennials that don't have a giant pile of money to manage, so they don't get served any other way. And just that's kind of the giant blue ocean opportunity. But yeah, I mean, anybody that can be served under the model is reasonable to serve under the model. It's not exclusive to Gen X and Gen Y folks.
So we know this was a broad stroke overview of monthly retainers. And like I said, Michael and I, we could talk about this for days. So what I would invite you to do is we want this to be kind of the general overview. We would love to dig in deeper on any of these topics. So join our VIP community. It's XYPlanningnetwork.com/VIP, and you'll get access to our private Facebook group where you can get in there and ask questions. And we want to hear, what of these topics do you want to hear more about? Is there one of these that, we really need to dig in deeper on, or we may include some of your questions in our monthly mailbag episodes titled Alan and Kitces Unhinged, which are always fun if you haven't been tying into those, because we want to know, where do you want us to go deeper? But ultimately, one is to kind of be a broad overview of what are we talking about when we're calling these things monthly retainers? Because I know you and I both take for granted the fact that we just say monthly subscription. We think everyone knows what we're talking about, and yet it is a relatively new concept.
And that's actually, as we wind down, that's the other thing I would kind of put out there for framing purposes. We started talking about this in XYPN, and even when Alan and I were getting the business started as monthly retainer, because obviously there's a lot of people already out there that do annual retainers. So we just wanted to make the distinction of calling it monthly. Frankly, when I talk about this to consumers, I never use the word monthly retainer. Like no one thinks that, it's just, there's even kind of this, I think from the consumer end, this like highfalutin, like I've got a financial planner on retainer, right? Like this, I guess for like a higher net worth folks, maybe there's kind of a cool cachet thing, but like for the average young person, that's not how they think of themselves. I describe it as financial planning for a monthly subscription fee. That's how I explain it. For a monthly subscription fee, you get access to your financial planner. They'll do a range of things for you throughout the year. You have access to them further if you need some help. Different planners provide different services depending on their niche and their specialization and what their service model is. But I explained it as financial planning for a monthly subscription fee.
Fair enough. I do the same thing. I call it monthly subscription or just subscription, because every subscription consumers pay is monthly. So you can just call it subscription financial planning or financial planning on subscription as opposed to monthly retainers. I do agree. Monthly retainers is definitely industry jargon. So, all right. So, Michael, thanks again for being on, and thanks everybody for listening in.
My pleasure. Thanks, Alan, for having me on. Thanks, as though I don't have a way to get on. Thanks for having me be here. Yeah.
Thanks for scheduling me.
Thanks for scheduling me. Absolutely. I hope this was helpful for everyone. Thanks for hanging out with us.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. This one was really fun. We always get a lot of questions about monthly retainers, and hopefully this gives you some insight as to why we believe it's the future for how financial planners get paid to serve next generation clients. Remember that you can join our VIP community at xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP to ask Kitces and myself any additional questions, particularly pertaining to monthly fees. We are looking to do some future episodes on specific topics that we covered more broadly today and dig in a little deeper, and want to know what you want to hear more about. Now, this month's episodes are brought to you by TD Ameritrade Institutional, which provides comprehensive brokerage and custody services to more than 4,000 fee-based independent registered investment advisors. Their advanced technology platform, coupled with personal support from dedicated service teams, allows investment advisors to grow and manage their practices more efficiently and effectively while optimizing time with clients. They provide a robust offering of products, programs, and services designed to help advisors build their businesses and do the best job possible that they can to help their clients with their financial goals. Thanks again for joining me today. We'll see you next time.
You're not alone, and you're not crazy. It's scary starting, building, and growing your own financial planning firm. And that's why we put together a free private community just for you, the Cutting Edge Financial Planner. Go to xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP or text XYPN Radio to 33344 and join a network of thousands ready to change the lives of Gen X and Gen Y clients.